The 20-year US military operation in Afghanistan, described as America's longest war, has come to an end. Washington's ambassador to Kabul and the US military commander there were on the final evacuation flight. The US says it has flown out nearly 80,000 civilians in the past few weeks. Taliban fighters have now taken control of Kabul airport. Video footage shows them entering a hangar containing abandoned Chinook helicopters. Earlier, Taliban forces fired their guns in the air and let off fireworks to celebrate the US completing its withdrawal. A huge rescue operation is taking place in the US state of Louisiana, which was struck by Hurricane Ida. The storm's known to have killed at least 2 people, but many more are feared to have lost their lives. Most of the state's southeast is without power.
The U.S. continues to fly Americans out of Kabul, Afghanistan, as a full U.S. withdrawal from the country nears. The United Nations Nuclear Agency says North Korea appears to have restarted operations at a nuclear reactor used to produce fuel for weapons. In Indonesia, hundreds of schools around Jakarta reopen for the first time since the start of the coronavirus crisis. Officials say COVID-19 cases continue to fall. And in the United States, Hurricane Ida weakens to a tropical storm after hitting Louisiana and cutting power to New Orleans.
Afghanistan saw more violence on the eve of the deadline for American troops to withdraw. The United States reported an attack on Kabul's airport. Foreign media quote an official as saying at least 5 rockets were intercepted, but there's no word on who fired them. The attack did not stop flights from taking off. The United States and allies hope to evacuate as many people as possible before time runs out. The U.S. Central Command says it's investigating reports that civilians were killed in its drone attack on a truck filled with explosives. Officials say a branch of the Islamic State group planned to use the vehicle to attack the airport. That militant group killed more than 100 people with a suicide bomb last week, including 13 U.S. service members. Meanwhile, the Taliban say America doesn't have the right to carry out airstrikes in Afghanistan. A spokesperson for the group told NHK such attacks breach the country's sovereignty.
America has no right to carry out strikes on our territory using aircraft. We haven't given this right to them. Such attacks are violations. They're wrong.
With Tuesday's deadline for the U.S. troop withdrawal looming, Mujahid urged Afghans not to flee the country.
No Afghan should leave the country. Nobody faces any problem in Afghanistan. We've given assurances to everyone that nobody will be pursued and nobody will be hurt.
Mujahid said a new administration will start functioning in the coming days.
We're trying to introduce new faces whom the people of Afghanistan should be optimistic about.
Western countries have said they'll decide whether to recognize a Taliban-led regime after assessing whether it protects women's rights. But Mujahid said setting that condition would infringe Afghanistan's sovereignty. Turning now to the coronavirus situation here in Japan. Daily case numbers in Tokyo continue to decline, but the number of serious cases remains high. Officials confirmed 1,915 new infections on Monday. It's the first time in over a month the figure dropped below 2,000. Week-on-week tallies have gone down for 8 straight days. But hospitals remain under strain with nearly 300 patients in serious condition. Many facilities aren't used to these sorts of cases, so a group of doctors with expertise in using machines to help people who can't breathe normally are providing assistance. Some visited this hospital in central Tokyo on Monday to help put a patient on a ventilator.
Usually we don't handle cases that require intensive care, so we lack expertise. We really appreciate their advice as colleagues.
The experts say Sunday was the worst day yet, with more than 900 patients across Japan relying on machines. The government hopes vaccinations will help ease the burden on hospitals. More than 55% of the population has received at least one jab. Nearly half the country remains under a state of emergency. While less strict than a lockdown, the declaration limits the scope of major events. The government also urges bars and restaurants not to serve alcohol. But there's evidence a festival in Aichi shirked the rules. Video of a recent event showed crowds of people without masks cheering. The prefecture received reports the government-run venue was also selling alcoholic drinks.
It is utterly outrageous and extremely regrettable. We express our strong displeasure.
Across Japan, authorities confirmed more than 13,000 new cases and 46 deaths. Japan's Coast Guard says 4 Chinese government vessels entered Japanese territorial waters off the Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea early Monday. The Coast Guard says the ships entered Japan's waters near the islands of Uotsuri and Minami Kojima. They arrived at around 2:40 a.m. and stayed in the area for nearly 10 hours. The vessels were reportedly approaching Japanese fishing boats. Coast Guard personnel told them to leave immediately. Japan controls the islands. The Japanese government maintains the islands are an inherent part of Japan's territory. China and Taiwan claim them. In the Tokyo Paralympics, 2 Japanese swimmers have won multiple medals. Suzuki Takayuki is competing in his 5th Paralympics. In the men's 200-meter freestyle, the 34-year-old got off to a fast start and was out in front, but later his rival, world record holder Ami Omer Dadaon from Israel, took the lead. Suzuki finished 2nd for his 4th medal. Swimmer Tomita Uchu took part in the men's 200-meter individual medley. He finished 3rd for his 2nd medal after winning silver in the men's 400-meter freestyle. And a veteran swimmer finished 6th in the women's 50-meter backstroke final. Narita Mayumi says the Tokyo Paralympics, her 6th games, will be her last. She's collected 15 gold medals in her career. Narita is also an executive board member of the Tokyo Games Organizing Committee. The International Paralympic Committee president said he will keep supporting 2 athletes from Afghanistan. The athletes arrived on Saturday. They'd initially given up on participating when the Taliban seized power. Hussein Rasuli is scheduled to compete in the men's long jump event. Zakia Kudadadi will participate in Taekwondo. She's the first female Paralympian to represent Afghanistan. Andrew Parsons talked exclusively with NHK. He said he'll continue supporting the 2 Afghan athletes even after the Games.
We will be supportive. We will do everything that we can. But of course, there is a limit to our participation in that. But I know that some governments are already expressing, let's say, good intentions for the future of these athletes.
And 7 days since the start of the Paralympics, the organizer's chief executive, Muto Toshiro, says preventive coronavirus measures have worked well with no serious impact on the Games. It's time now for a check on world weather with our meteorologist, Sayaka Mori.
Hello there. Hurricane Ida made landfall in Louisiana as a Category 4. That was one of the strongest storms to hit Louisiana in recorded history. It has dumped heavy rainfall, and coincidentally, it made landfall in Louisiana on the same day as Katrina did 16 years ago. It made landfall near Port Fourchon, and gusts were reached about 280 kilometers per hour. We have some video coming out of the Louisiana area. Ida was packing winds of 240 kilometers per hour when it hit the coast. It has caused loss of life. More than 1 million people were without electricity in New Orleans. U.S. President has declared a major disaster in Louisiana. Ida is no longer a hurricane, but as a weaker storm, it's going to move over the southeastern U.S., reaching Tennessee as we go into Tuesday. Tennessee was hit by record rainfall last week and then eventually head towards northeastern United States, including Washington, D.C., as well as New York City. Meanwhile, it's almost September, but heat is still building over Japan. The high rose to 36.8 degrees in Gifu Prefecture. Hot weather conditions will continue for the next couple of days, but finally cooling down to the 20s in Tokyo on Wednesday. That's it for me. Stay safe.